By the third day, the fever had cracked the marble. The dragon lay in the great ceremonial chamber of the Jade Palace. It had gone down there, mid-audience, before 100 witnesses, and the heat coming off it had split the floor stones in long white seams, wilted the banners on the walls, and driven the imperial court back through doors that servants now opened with wrapped hands. From the corridor, looking in, you saw it through shimmer, the way you see across summer fields, a mountain of black scales, heaving, glowing at the seams like a banked forge, and around it a widening circle of ruined floor that the palace had begun to call, in whispers, the Blister Ring. The dragon was the emperor. Everyone knew it and no one said it, because saying it made the next sentence true. The Emperor Maravel is dying, locked in the beast's shape, burning from the inside, and no one can get near enough to help. 12 imperial healers had tried. I will be fair to them. They tried honestly. The next wave came with soaked blankets and long-handled tools, and lasted minutes. By the third day, the court had run out of both healers and euphemisms. The council met in the coolest room and began, delicately, drafting language about succession. Now, what the court did not know, what makes this fever a crime and not a misfortune. 6 days earlier, at the harvest banquet, a faction of the council had put slow-fire venom in the emperor's cup. The poisoners had planned for everything except one thing, and she was, at that hour, 3 streets from the palace, asleep in a boarding house, with her boots on. Her name was Ren Calder, and she was 36 years old, and she had spent 11 years in the plague wards of the Grey Fever, which means the following. She had sat 600 deathbeds, she had buried 2 of every 3 colleagues she ever trained with, and she had learned the one lesson that no academy teaches and no fire can take away. She had learned exactly how much of what surrounds the dying is performance, and how little of it is necessary, and what the necessary part weighs. The necessary part weighs almost nothing. It is presence. That is the whole secret of the plague nurse. At the end, past medicine, past hope, the necessary thing is a human being who stays, and Ren Calder had made of staying an entire life. The Grey Fever had burned itself out 4 years ago. The wards had emptied, the survivors had scattered, and Ren had drifted from posting to posting since, competent, decorated, silently misplaced, because it turns out that if your one great gift is standing at the gates of death unafraid, peacetime does not know where to file you. The summons that came for her on the 3rd night was not official. It came from the chief physician, the honorable man with the crisped eyebrows, who had trained beside her in the grey years, and who now sat ruined in his chambers, and who, when the council's talk had turned to succession, had thought of one person on earth. His note said, in full, "They are drafting his funeral while he still breathes. It is heat, Ren. It is only heat and dying, and you never feared either. Come." She read it twice, packed in 9 minutes, and walked to the palace through the dark. At the doors of the ceremonial chamber, the guards, understanding orders to admit no one to their own deaths, looked at this small woman with her plague ward satchel and her straw sleeping pallet rolled under one arm, and refused. "I'm expected," said Ren Calder. "By whom?" She looked past them, down the ruined shimmer of the hall, at the black mountain heaving in its blister ring, and the guards would swear afterward, both of them, independently, that the dragon's breathing changed when her voice reached it. "By him," she said. "Open the door." She walked the length of the ceremonial chamber alone, into heat that arrived like a wall, and she did the thing that made the guards call for the chief physician to come and see. She unrolled her straw pallet on the cracked marble. Inside the blister ring, a body's length from the dragon's jaw, kicked off her boots, set her satchel down as a pillow, lay down on her side facing the great burning head, and went to sleep. I want to slow down here, because the court would spend years explaining this moment wrongly, calling it fearlessness, calling it madness, calling it, later, when the ballads started, enchantment. It was none of those. It was expertise. Understand what Ren Calder knew that 12 healers had not. Heat this side of burning is pain, and pain is survivable, and she had 11 years of knowing precisely where this side of burning lay. She had chosen her distance to the handspan, and the pallet, the boots, The sleeping? That was not bravado. That was the oldest instrument in the plague nurse's bag. Because what does every creature at the burning end of dying see, all day and all night? It sees fear. It sees faces at the edge of rooms, instruments held at arm's length, people who arrive braced to flee. The dying are connoisseurs of flinching. It is the last fluency they acquire. And what it does to them, she had watched it 600 times, is it tells them, hour upon hour, you are already gone. You are a thing to be feared and managed and survived. You are alone. So the first medicine Ren Calder ever gave the Emperor of 9 provinces was this. She slept. Unguarded, unbraced, boots off, within reach of his jaws, the whole grammar of her body saying the one sentence no one had said to him in 6 burning days. You are not a horror. I am staying. Watch me sleep. If you can't. Staying is possible. Look, I am doing it. And the dragon watched. All that first night, the great fever-bright eyes stayed open on the small woman breathing evenly on the straw inside his blister ring. And the palace record-keepers, peering from the far doorway, wrote down the first hopeful sentence in 6 days of entries. The fire is no lower, but it climbs no higher. The beast has stopped thrashing. It is watching the nurse. She spent the second day at work inside the ring, sponging the cracked floor with vinegar water that hissed to steam, rigging wet sailcloth on poles the way the plague wards rigged shade. Small, stubborn competences that changed the room from a place where a monster was dying into a place where a patient was being nursed. The distinction is not decoration. Rooms speak. She made the room say recovery. But it is the second night the palace remembers, because on the second night, the litany began. Every plague ward of the Grey Years had one. Half prayer, half nursery rhythm, wholly unofficial. The low chain of words the night nurses kept going in the worst hours, because the dying lose the thread of time in the dark, and a voice going steadily is a handrail. Every nurse kept her own. Ren's was built of the wards she had served, the way sailors' songs are built of ports. The fire is a liar, and the night is not long. I have sat with 600, and the dark took none of them alone. Not one alone. Not one, not once. Not while I kept the light. Morning is a fact. I have seen it 600 times. It has never once failed to come. Hold on quietly. Holding is the whole of the work. The fire is a liar, and the night is not long. Around and around, hour past hour, in the voice she had worn smooth on 600 deathbeds. Not loud, not performed, pitched exactly to carry to a burning ear and no farther. And inside the furnace of the locked shape, where the venom had him welded into pain, where 6 days of fear stink from fleeing healers had told him over and over, you are a horror, you are finished, you are alone, the Emperor Maravel held on to that voice with what I can only describe as both hands. He could not answer. He could not signal. The lock was total. But the fever-bright eye stayed fixed on the small shape on the straw, and when the record-keeper's entry for that night was read aloud to the council, 3 ministers went quietly to re-examine their consciences, because the entry said, the beast turns its head to keep the nurse in view. When she sleeps, it watches her sleep. When she wakes and speaks, the glow of the seams abates. The physicians have no explanation. The night guards have begun to call it the lullaby. On the 3rd night, the dragon stopped drinking, and Ren Calder committed the act that the imperial history, with unusual restraint, records in one sentence. The nurse then carried water to the emperor by hand. Here is what the sentence holds. A fevered dragon that stops taking water has begun dying in earnest. Every hour dry now compounded the burning. The chamber's great troughs stood ruined at the walls, boiled dry days ago. The aqueduct men could not approach. And the beast could not, or would not, lift its head, and the court's conclusion at dawn would have been the correct clinical conclusion in any textbook. The end has begun. Ren's conclusion was different, because hers came from the wards. She had seen it in humans, at the end of long fevers, and it was not always the body failing. Sometimes it was the will, making its quiet exit. The dying stop drinking, she knew, at precisely the point where they stop believing they are worth the trouble of watering. So she made it trouble, and she made the trouble visible. She found the largest vessel she could carry, A ceremonial silver ewer. Absurd, magnificent. And she filled it at the corridor cistern, and she carried it the full length of the chamber, into the heat, sweating, staggering slightly, all 5 feet and some inches of her, and she set it down by the great cracked jaw, and she said, in the ward voice, the voice that has never once in 11 years been argued with, "You will drink now." I did not carry this for the exercise. 600 patients, and I have lost every one that stopped drinking, and kept every one that didn't. So those are the stakes, and this is the ewer, and here is my hand. Drink. And she put her bare hand on his jaw, the first living touch since the banquet, laid flat and unafraid directly on scales that had crisped eyebrows at 40 feet, and tipped the ewer against the seam of that vast mouth. The palace holds its breath at this point in the story, every time it is told. So did the record keepers at the door. What the fever-bright eye did was close, once, slowly, in a creature locked past all speech, the largest available act of surrender, and then the emperor of 9 provinces drank from a silver ewer held by a plague nurse, and drank the next one, and the one after, 9 trips to the cistern before dawn, and when the sun came up, the seams of him had dimmed from forge glow to ember, and the entry in the record reads, "She has her hand upon him at all times now. The beast will take nothing except from her hand." The physicians have stopped offering explanations. The lullaby continues. It was on the 3rd night too, between the 5th ewer and the 6th, that she began talking to him as a person, and this the record keepers could not hear, because it was pitched for a burning ear and no farther. But he heard it, and he kept it, and we have it now from him. "I had a brother," she told the fever-bright eye, resting her back against the jaw between trips, because the plague wards teach you to spend every idle minute sitting down. Aldous. He went in the 2nd summer of the gray fever, in the ward I was working, 4 beds from where I stood. You learn a thing, losing someone 4 beds away with your hands full. You learn the hands must stay full. I have kept them full 11 years. She turned her head and looked at the vast eye watching her. The court out there thinks I am doing something remarkable. I am doing what the full hands do. You are 4 beds away, majesty or beast or whatever you are under all that burning. I am not losing anyone at 4 beds. Not ever again. So drink. And the palace record for that night carries one more line, added at dawn, in the chief physician's own hand, the man who had trained beside her in the gray years, and knew about Aldous, because he had held her up at the burying. Whatever is saving the emperor, it is not medicine. I was 12 years her superior in rank, and am not fit to carry her satchel. Note for the honors list. Her name is Ren Calder. The palace should learn to spell it. The palace learned to spell it. On the 4th night, the men who had poured the cup came back to finish the work, and discovered what the court had not yet understood, that something inside the blister ring was no longer only a patient. They came as healers. That was the elegance of it. 3 men in physicians' greys, carrying a draft prepared for the desperate hour, volunteers where all others had failed. The court, drowning in hope since the water nights, waved them through. Ren was asleep on her pallet when the chamber doors opened, and she woke the way plague nurses wake, entirely and silently, and lay still, and watched 3 healers she had never seen walk the hall with the wrong gait. She had 11 years of watching men approach dangerous beds. Healers approaching a patient brace toward the patient. These men braced toward the witnesses, checking the doors, the galleries, the sight lines. She was already rising when it stopped mattering what she had noticed. Because the dragon moved. 6 days. The court had watched that mountain incapable of lifting its own head to drink. What rose off the cracked marble now rose all at once, seams flaring forge bright, and placed itself, one vast, heat-shimmering wall of black, between the 3 men and the straw pallet, not between the men and itself. The record keepers at the door saw it plainly, and wrote it plainly. The beast interposed its body before the nurse. The burning eye came down level with the 3 gray-clad men, and the Emperor Maravel, locked, voiceless, dying, looked at the hands that had poured his cup, and let a sound come up out of the furnace of himself that cracked what remained of the nearest windows. They broke. Of course they broke. They ran the length of the hall with the sound behind them, and ran into the arms of the night guard, and the draft they carried went to the chief physician's bench before the hour was out. And by morning the palace had its answer as to the banquet. The vial's contents matched the venom's signature, and the 3 names unraveled a faction, and the arrests moved through the council wing like weather. But that is politics, and the chamber did not care. In the chamber, when the doors had shut again, the dragon turned back to a small woman standing barefoot on hot marble in her shift, entirely awake, and the 2 of them looked at each other for a long moment. The plague nurse and the patient who had just spent, on her protection, strength he did not have. "Well," said Ren Calder in the ward voice, though the record notes it was not quite steady. "Now we've both been introduced. Lie down. You've undone 2 nights of my work in a minute and a half, and you will drink twice tonight to answer for it." The mountain lay back down. Where its head settled, it settled 6 feet nearer the pallet than it had ever lain before, and she let it, and that arrangement of the room never changed again. The 5th night was the crisis, and it is the night the Empire knows by heart, and I will tell it the way the record keepers set it down, because they were there, and their hands shook while they wrote. Slow fire, cornered, the drinking, the cooling, the vigil had all been prying at the lock, does what fires do when they begin to lose. It flared. It made it stand. An hour past midnight the seams of him went from ember to white, the shattered windows lit like day, and the great body began to shudder in waves the length of a shipwreck, and everything Ren had built across 4 nights began to burn away in front of her. The heat inside the blister ring became not survivable. "This is not a figure of speech." The chief physician, weeping again at the doorway, measured it by the behavior of silver at the ring's edge, and ordered her out on his authority as her superior. The night guard was sent in to carry her. They did not reach her. What stopped them is disputed. Some say the heat, some say her face when she turned it on them. The record says only, the nurse refused the order, and could not be retrieved. What is not disputed is what she did. She wetted every cloth in the chamber, and wrapped herself like a burn dressing, and she took up the last full ewer, and she went forward, into heat that was killing her, hands blistering through the wrappings, and she got low, beside the great convulsing head, at the seam of the jaw she had touched on the 3rd night, and she put her ruined hand back on that exact place, and she anchored, and she began the litany. Not the ward litany now, she was past it. What came instead, hour upon white hour, was everything she had, 600 beds worth of it, the whole hoarded fluency of a life spent at the gates. The fire is a liar. You are not a horror. I have seen horrors, and I have seen you, and I know the difference. 600 went through this dark ahead of you, and not one went alone, and you will not be the first. Do you hear me? Not the first. Not while my hand is on you. Hold. Holding is the whole of the work. I did not walk into your furnace to lose. I have never yet given the fire an excuse, and I will not give it you. And at the bottom of the lock, in the white core of the venom's last stand, the Emperor Maravel, who had ruled alone, trusted no one, slept his whole reign with guards on his door and one eye open, heard that voice arrive inside the fire after him, felt the small anchored weight of a burned hand that would not lift, and made the decision the poison had bet everything he could not make. Not the decision to fight. He had been fighting 6 days. The other one. The one the dying make or do not make at the bottom of the crisis. The one no physician can make for them. He decided to be worth the trouble of watering. He turned. The record keepers saw the whole mountain of him turn, inside the white, toward the voice, and the hand, and the morning it kept insisting on. Fevers break the way sieges break, all at once, and silently, and you know it first by what stops. An hour before dawn on the 6th night, the shuddering stopped. The white died out of the seams, then the forge glow, then, for the first time since the banquet, the ember light itself, and darkness came back into the ceremonial chamber like a tide coming in, and with it, cold ordinary air. The record keepers, who had learned 6 nights of dread, wrote in a panicking scrawl, "The light has gone out of the beast, we fear the end." Then the next line, in a different hand, because the first record keeper could not continue, "The beast sleeps. God be thanked. It breathes long and slow and the burning is ended. The nurse has put her head down upon its jaw, and sleeps also. We will not be waking either of them." The court came to the doorway in stockinged feet, all that dawn, minister after minister, to look at it, the blister ring cold, the marble ticking as it cooled, and at the center of the ruin, a dragon sleeping like a spent storm, with a small bandaged woman asleep against its jaw, her hand, burned, wrapped, immovable, still lying flat on the scales where it had been anchored since the crisis, because even asleep, Ren Calder did not lift her hand before the watch was done. She had never once done it in 11 years. She was not going to begin on her 601st. He shifted on the 7th morning. She woke, entirely, silently, to marble, and ministers weeping at doorways, and where the mountain had been, a man. He was gray-eyed and gaunt, and 41 years old. Sitting on the cracked floor in the plain shift, the physicians rushed to him, 6 days of beast and burning behind his face, and he was looking at her bandaged hand the way men look at the sea. "You are the Emperor, then," said Ren Calder, because someone had to begin, and the ward voice does not do awe. "I am told," said Maravel, and his voice was a ruin, burnt down by 6 days of fire, and it was the first sound of him anyone had heard since the banquet, and the doorway wept harder. "You would be the lullaby. I would be the nurse, Majesty. The lullaby is a technical instrument. It held the door," he said, "of the furnace, from the inside, for 6 nights, and then the Emperor of 9 provinces bowed his head over her burned hand, did not kiss it, bowed over it, the way you bow over something that outranks you. I heard every word. I want that entered in the record. Every word, all 6 nights. Enter it." They entered it. It is there now. The court expected her to be titled, pensioned, and returned to wherever plague nurses go. The court had not understood the water nights. He healed slowly, as burned things do, and he would be nursed by no one else. Not from sentiment, the ministers told each other at first, but from sense. She was the proven instrument. The ministers watched the proven instrument bully the Emperor of 9 provinces through convalescence in the ward voice. Watched him, a man whose trust had been a fortress with one occupant, eat when she said eat, and rest when she said rest, and laugh, unprecedented, twice in one recorded afternoon, and the ministers quietly revised their analysis. He asked her once, in that convalescent autumn, the question the whole palace had been asking behind its hands. 12 healers ran. "You unrolled a straw bed inside the ring and slept. I have wanted to ask it since I could speak again. Why were you not afraid?" Ren thought about it properly, because it deserved a proper answer, and he watched her think, which had become. The record keepers had noticed, the gardeners had noticed, the Empire was noticing, his preferred occupation. "Florence Nightingale," she said at last, "a nurse they still teach where I trained, was asked how she managed what she managed, and she said, 'I attribute my success to this. I never gave or took any excuse. That is the whole of it, Majesty. Fear is the body offering an excuse. I stopped taking the body's excuses 11 years ago. It makes them out of habit, and I file them and go to work. You were dying and loud about it. Dying I have sat with 600 times. It has never once been a reason to sleep elsewhere. Marry me," said the Emperor of 9 provinces. "You are convalescent," said Ren Calder, "and I am on duty." "You have been on duty 11 years, he said, and took the burned hand, with great care, in both of his, and the gray eyes were not convalescent at all. "I heard every word in the dark, Ren. 600 of them went through ahead of me, and not one went alone. I heard it. I held to it. It is the truest sentence ever said inside my hearing. But I have amendments. Come off the night watch. Marry me, and the 601st will sit up with you. For the rest of it, every dark, every fire, every morning that has never once failed to come. Turnabout. Holding is the whole of the work. You taught me. Let me hold." The record does not say how long she was silent. The record keepers, who by then loved her like a regiment loves a sergeant, record only her answer, and the palace repeats it still, every time the story is told at the fireside, which is always, "Well," said the plague nurse, in the ward voice, which had never once in 11 years been argued with, and was not argued with now. "Since you've drunk your water." "Yes." They were married in the ceremonial chamber. She insisted on the chamber, cracked marble, blister ring and all. She forbade the masons to touch it, and it is unrepaired to this day, the most famous floor in 9 provinces. The Empress Ren walked to her wedding across the seams the fever had split, past the place where a straw pallet once lay a body's length from a burning jaw, and the whole court stood witness, and up through the shattered and remade windows the morning came in, as it had never once failed to do. The fire is a liar, and the night is not long. He had heard every word. He spent the rest of a long and unusually merciful reign proving he had listened.